Capital, welcome to Your Source TV, where we empower you to think outside the box. I'm Elena Vladi, and in this segment, we'll discuss how to find new fulfillment in your relationships. With us is Franklin W. Skip Ellis and his wife, Marilyn. Both are licensed practicing clinical social workers, and Mr. Ellis is an undergraduate degree in physics and a graduate degree in environmental engineering and social work. Prior to becoming a clinical social worker, he was a naval officer on nuclear-powered submarines and a practicing environmental engineer. Every human being has a basic need for meaningful relationships. The goal of a meaningful relationship is the mutual satisfaction of the basic biopsychosocial needs, especially bonding, attachment, and autonomy. The ability to have a sense of safety, physical closeness, and emotional openness is one of the most important factors in human relations and is called bonding. For some people, bonding comes naturally. For some, it is a very painful process. Let's start with the basic biopsychosocial needs. The first three that we're going to cover are going to be the need for attachment, the need for autonomy, and the need for bonding. The need for bonding would be the first. So let's go into the first three right now. Or do you want to tell us what the 7 are first, and then we'll go back to the most important 3?
So the 7 basic needs that are addressed in the book on bonding psychotherapy are the need for bonding, the need for attachment, need for autonomy, need for self-esteem, to have an identity, to sort of know who you are, need for physical well-being and a sense of pleasure, and a need either for spirituality or that your life has some meaning to it. And so those would be the 7 basic needs.
Okay.
And then in a therapy, where we do most of our focus is on the first 3 needs: the need for bonding, the need for attachment, and the need for autonomy.
Okay.
And then bonding you might look at as the cornerstone need, and in Western civilization, in many ways, it's the forgotten need. Mm-hmm. And it's a need that exists throughout our life. So normally when we think of bonding, we think of little infants, or we think of a bunch of guys getting together, in male bonding. What we mean when we talk about bonding is a need for physical closeness, for touch, for emotional openness, so there's emotional resonance that exists between people, and that both of those be safe. And that starts in infancy. Some theorists think it may start actually in the womb. So that a sense that you're basically okay, and that you can have your feelings, that touch is safe, and that having your emotions and feeling your emotions and expressing your emotions can be accepted and held in a relationship. When bonding goes well, then you develop the need for attachment. So attachment sort of builds on top of bonding. And attachment is the need for a safe, reliable, predictable relationship. So we can bond with almost anyone. Attachment takes time, takes pressure. So attachment's where the relationship really evolves, really develops. And again, it's to have it be safe, reliable, predictable. And then if attachment works well, and we're looking at sort of a child developing, then the need for autonomy comes online. And the autonomy is to have my thoughts, my feelings, my ideas, my own independent self, independent of the relationship. So the self, you might say, is born out of the relationship. So those would be the first 3 basic needs.
The original sense of bonding is the thought of the mother and the child and the look that goes between them and the feeling that is there and the bond that exists. And most relationships, most people develop out of that bond. That bond may be extremely positive and extremely healthy, and it may be partly healthy and partly not so healthy. But whatever that bonding experience is, everything else is built on top of it. Attachment and the form of the attachment goes on top of the bonding. And then your ability to become autonomous is built on whatever happens with attachment and whatever has happened in autonomy. So if it's skewed at the bottom, everything becomes skewed.
So kind of the bonding process is the core.
It is the bottom layer that supports, it's the foundation.
Foundation. And
Yes.
then, so basically, if a child, for instance, is not to have a strong bond with its mother, would it affect personal relationship
It
bonding?
affects everything.
It does. And
Yes.
then everything
Strongly.
after that will be affected by that.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
so what can you do to get to the core to fix that?
Well, one of the things that we work with a great deal is how do you develop a feeling of, the definition of bonding is the ability to be physically close and to be emotionally open. So the first thing we work with is the ability to be physically close to another person without being overwhelmed by the emotions, by your emotions coming up that this is not safe.
Right.
So simply being able to touch another person and being able to tolerate the feelings that come up inside you when you have that experience, that's a very, very necessary experience that many people don't have.
So in a way, you'd be teaching someone from the beginning
Exactly.
how to bond.
Exactly. And that's just the physical closeness aspect. And then how do you be emotionally open with someone to let them know, this is what this experience is like for me when I touch you. I feel frightened.
So we use a series of graduated closeness exercises is one part of it. So getting more and more close physically and moving to touch, and then giving permission to feel your feelings and express your feelings and have them supported by another person.
So giving you that realm of safety, that it's okay.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
you give that comfort zone as well. And so in a way, you guide people to experience that together.
Right.
Yes.
And then since bonding occurs at the very foundational level, lots of times what you might call the dysfunctional representations of bonding, the sense of it when it doesn't work well,
Right.
can't be verbalized. So we've had clients who'll come in and you go to touch them and you ask, what's touch like? And they just say, I can't say, but it feels like it's poison. My mother's touch felt like poison.
Wow.
And no permission to feel. So, or permission, like men typically can feel anger but not pain or fear. Women can feel pain but they can't feel anger. So there's every family has it different, certain emotions that are more allowed or less allowed. And so a lot of the work we do is in developing access to all the emotions.
And it's really important for a person to be able to express what they feel, because if you don't, you almost feel suppressed. And so in a way, it's very important what you're doing, because you're allowing people to be themselves and not be suppressed in a way.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that happens when someone grows up with inadequate bonding, one person I worked with learned to be angry, and that's the only emotion that he could express. So he would literally come in a room with this horrible rage that was just pouring out
You
of
could
him.
feel it.
Everyone could feel it, and people would avoid him. So he was fired by one therapist after another. And then when he came to see me, he was surprised that I was willing to work with him, because I knew there was a lot underneath that anger, and it was not the real person.
It's just he wasn't showing it, or he wasn't
He was
able to let it out.
only able to show anger because it protected him. It kept people at bay. He felt safe when
So
he was angry.
That's the way he made his world safe.
Yes.
But what it
Right.
covered up was, a belly full of a lot of very intense pain.
Right.
And then when we talk about emotional openness, so we had a client once from an Italian family. So she said, but it could be any family, where they came in and she said, oh, we're emotionally open. We scream and yell at each other all the time. That's not a functional way of sharing your emotions, of expressing your emotions. So what we try and do is for people who are very tightly, say, zipped up, can't access their emotions, to open them up, to feel them, and to find appropriate ways to express them. And then for people who are sort of emotionally dumping, to find ways to own the deeper emotion, like the very angry man Marilyn was talking about, and to, what would you say, civilize it, humanize it?
civilize, humanize, and to help the person explore the range of their own emotion. It's similar to learning about music. When you listen to an orchestra, the first time you hear it, you don't pick up the nuances.
Oh, no.
But with education, you do. With exposure, you do. Same thing is true with emotions. If you're able to experience your emotions and feel safe while you're experiencing them, and have an environment that allows you that room, then you can learn what those emotions mean to you. You can develop meaning for you. You can learn how to express them appropriately. You can learn how to develop a depth in relationship.
And you can grow, basically.
Absolutely. That is growth. As you learn more and more, it's growth.
Tell us about the 3 major problems in relationships.
So
Briefly tell us about those
Okay.
problems, what they are.
this is sort of a shorthand way of trying to understand it. So one is I oftentimes find that people have a misunderstanding of what love is and a misunderstanding of what having a self is. So that's one.
Okay.
Then the other is a misunderstanding of what is the function, what's the purpose of an intimate, of an emotionally significant relationship. And then sometimes, especially if the bonding needs weren't met, the attachment needs weren't met, and the autonomy needs weren't met properly, we don't have the internal structures, the internal capacity to create and maintain a relationship. So the 3 areas would be changing what your understanding of love is and shifting your understanding of bonding.
Okay.
And attachment addresses that. Shifting the understanding of what a relationship is about, that relationships are meant to have tension in them, and that the purpose of a meaningful emotional relationship is to help you grow up. So it's not necessarily that it always feels good. So it's a vehicle of growth. And then we have some very specific work that we learned in Germany of how to build a more solid, a more robust self, to have certain core abilities, 24 that the Germans have outlined.
It's fascinating. Stay with us. We'll be back right after the break.
Russia Today TV, where Russian and American businesses come together. To be listed on Russia Today's Business Connection, go to RussiaTodayTV.com. Olga Sheymov is an internationally acclaimed artist. You can see a virtual gallery tour at VladiArts.com.
From the nation's capital, welcome back to Your Source TV. We're here with Dr. Skip and Marilyn Ellis, both doctors, and we're going to go into the theory of bonding psychotherapy. Tell us about that theory.
So in a nutshell, so it's a very complex theory, but to make it simple, when these basic needs we were talking about, especially bonding, safe relationships, and to have your own self, are met, we feel good. When they're not met, we don't feel good.
No.
And in the not feeling good, and it's true throughout our life, so childhood, adulthood, all the way through. And when we don't feel good, especially younger when our emotional brain is forming, then we create certain neural nets, certain patterns in the brain. Marilyn has a great way of describing it. We used to have a gravel driveway, and it would get ruts in it. And so we get, metaphoric ruts in our brain, and we keep traveling down those same ruts. You can't get out of them.
Kind of getting stuck.
Absolutely.
Getting stuck. And
Traveling the same path over and over again without being able to vary out of it
I see.
because it's so deeply
In the grooves.
engraved. Right.
and it's based on your needs not getting met and having dysfunctional emotions, dysfunctional beliefs, dysfunctional patterns of behavior. And so bonding psychotherapy is a therapy that sort of takes a look at how did this form, how is psychopathology, in other words, how does unhappiness come out of it, and how do you produce change?
Right.
And so that's the theory in a nutshell.
And a lot of this theory is developed out of brain science, that they've explored how the human brain works, how it works from a level of infancy up to the level of adulthood, and they've discovered that you can put down new neural nets And that is what creates a change in behavior, that without knowing how to do that and knowing what they are, behavior doesn't change. As Skip was saying the other night in a group we did, he was saying, you can have all the insight in the world, it will not produce change. And it doesn't. It's creating this background of actually a rut of new behavior that's positive.
But it is
to replace
possible
the old.
to do
It's
that.
absolutely possible, but you have to know how to do it.
Right.
So what the theory does is it looks at the neuroscience. It looks at how do you create change, and then the therapeutic interventions are based on modern science and through interventions that have been tested and proven to work. So it's sort of an integrated theory going from basic needs being met, not met, what happens in the brain, how do you change the brain, and working. It's called neuroplasticity, and that's the part of the brain that can change, and the emotional part changes the most easily in adulthood, which is good news. So therapy can produce change.
And
one of
but
the-
there needs to be a willingness there.
Actually, there just needs to be participation.
Really?
Really.
That's hopeful.
And one of the things
Yes.
we've done is, actually this is more Skip's work than mine, we've done testing on people before and after to find out that the things that we do to help them change actually work.
Wow.
So there's test results that demonstrate there's marked change in these people in a relatively short period of time. And it stays consistent. It stays.
Please explain the basic conflict of physical well-being and pleasure.
For some of us, this would be probably the easiest way to understand it. Oftentimes, if you grow up with a depressed mother, then out of loyalty, out of love, out of the misunderstanding of love, because the child has no choice, they won't be any happier than their mother. So the child may not be depressed, but you might say how happy they can let themselves be.
It's almost a guilty feeling
Right,
if they were
gets
to be more
capped.
happy.
And so this conflict comes up between the need to feel good, to be happy, to take care of yourself, and this loyalty, usually out of consciousness. So part of what therapy does is try to make this conflict conscious so you can change it. So you go to feel good, and then you sabotage yourself. And there's the conflict. And it can happen with any one of those basic needs when they haven't been met and you don't have a functional way of approaching them.
How does one keep the basic needs of bonding, attachment, and autonomy in balance?
That's actually, you might say, the growth engine of adulthood.